Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Accent Training Podcast. My name is Pat. I'm your personal American accent coach, and I want you to practice your English listening today. Today's episode is not going to be a lesson, but rather an interview that I had recently with an actual licensed government Canadian immigration consultant. Now, that might sound a little bit boring, but he's going to teach you how to avoid being scammed, how to identify criminal con artists who want to steal your information and steal your money and are exposing the fact that you are uninformed about all of the details of how you're going to move to Canada or immigrate to the United States. Now, this guy's working for the Canadian government, but believe me, the scams that he's warning about are relevant for Canada, the United States, England, Ireland, Australia, wherever you're moving. At least any English-speaking country that you're moving to. There's a high risk that you'll be targeted by these scams, or possibly people that you love and care about. Now, if you're someone who's listening who has been scammed in the past, I just want to comment on something. Getting scammed means that you have imagination. It literally means that you're intelligent enough to want something big and to take risks. So being scammed is something that's going to happen from time to time if you're an intelligent person. And I know that you are, of course, a highly intelligent person. That's why you're listening to this podcast. So let me help you protect yourself and protect the people that you love, my friend. Let's listen to this fantastic interview that I had with Rod Chalmers. And if you like what you hear and you want to get a hold of Rod, make sure that you check out the description of this episode for a link to his Instagram profile. So welcome on to the Accent Training Podcast. Rod, how are you doing today, sir?
Very well. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, tell our audience about yourself a little bit. Why should they be listening to you today?
Well, today's goal is to prevent people from spending money on fraudulent actors who are claiming to help people come to Canada when in actual fact they are not authorized to do so. And we see lots of people scammed and their money disappears. And in the worst case scenario, if they do get into Canada, they are often deported for having used a fraudulent, unauthorized representative. So we're going to give some tips today. And I'll tell you a few stories, actually, about some of the more serious cases that we've had in Canada. And at the end of the podcast, I will indicate to people where they can go to check to see if their representative is in fact licensed in Canada to do this sort of work.
So this is huge. People must waste just their life savings, getting scammed and just because they didn't know better. So I'd like to ask first, what has been your experience that, has shed so much light for you on this topic? Because personally, I don't know anything about it, even as a Canadian.
I got into immigration consulting a number of years ago because I became aware of this sort of fraud. And the most egregious cases, the most serious cases are the ones that make it into the news. So we do get information from our major news outlets about when this sort of thing happens. And of course, in March, next month, we have a fraud awareness month. I think it's going to be our 10th or 11th fraud awareness month in Canada. So public education is done, but unfortunately, you're correct. A lot of these stories fly under the radar and nobody ever even hears. And of course, the people who do use an appropriate representative and make it are online saying, hey, we made it. This is great. The people who fail aren't on social media. So as a result, we don't know their story. Nobody's going to promote the fact that they got scammed. It's quite embarrassing for people. So we get this biased representation from people online that when you apply to Canada, you get in. When in actual fact, those who don't get in are just quiet.
That's so true. I mean, I've got tons of people that I follow from all over the world who, they post the pictures of the universities they go to, just taking a walk in the snow, all these kinds of things. But of course, those are people who were following every step as they were supposed to. And you certainly wouldn't brag about it if you got kicked out of the country. So I'd love to hear just any of these experiences from people. Actually, my first question is there a particular group of people or a particular country that's targeted most with these scams? Just because, if anyone from that country is listening, so that they're extra alert. Are there any particular groups, or is it just kind of the whole world is at risk?
Unfortunately, a lot of this is organized crime. This is actually planned, well thought out. There are scripts that are used, and there is no particular country. We see a lot from India, but only because we also have a lot of Indian immigrants. So I think on a per 100,000 person basis, I don't know if it's any higher there than it is elsewhere, although countries like India have been known to engage in some fraudulent activity. A lot of the call center scams originate out of India. Our Royal Canadian Mounted Police went to India to work with the Indian government to shut down these call centers because the Indian government doesn't want them either. And of course, once they're shut down for a week, they pop up in another city. So it's whack-a-mole. It's impossible really to shut this down. So the absolute best defense for people is to become educated about how to find out if you're being scammed and how to legitimize the paperwork that you're being asked to sign.
Okay. So what are some red flags that folks should be watching for then, so that they can avoid the scams, or so that they at least know, hey, this person might be trying to scam them?
I think the first one is a guarantee. Some people call it a sure shot or a guaranteed acceptance. Apply with me. I know people on the inside. This is absolutely irrelevant. Even if they do know people on the inside, they have no idea that the application is going to go to that person. So
unless it's the King of England now, I should say. I almost said the Queen of England.
Yeah.
Unless it's the King, there's no guarantee.
There is no guarantee. Exactly. Operating in a public space is a bit of a sign. We try to keep all of this work confidential. So it's okay if you're going to meet at a coffee shop, but obviously it has to be very, very quiet. The information can't be seen by other people. And it's a little bit unusual simply because it's a legal matter. And generally legal matters aren't talked about in public. Unfortunately, relying on somebody's registration or license number may not be good enough because there are unauthorized agents stealing license numbers and names. So they find out who's licensed. They say, okay, I'm Bob Smith and my license is 12345, because there is a Bob Smith whose license is 12345, and you don't know what Bob Smith looks like. So I'll call myself Bob Smith, take your $5,000, not file any paperwork whatsoever, blame it on the government that, wow, they must have lost it or something. I don't know. I'll have to check. And then another couple of months goes by, and before you know it, that person is long gone with your money, and the process has to start all again if you can afford it.
Folks, this is just a quick message to remind you to subscribe to the Accent Training Podcast. If you haven't already, you don't want to miss a second of this accent training experience, and you want to be updated whenever I've got new content out for you. So if you haven't subscribed, hit subscribe now. Wow, I see. Yeah.
Right. So in some cases, these people really legitimately think that their agent is authorized. They sound intelligent, they know the rules, they have the forms, but of course, all of this stuff is available publicly. We had a case in Canada just about a year ago where 900 students were threatened with deportation for misrepresentation because they had submitted fraudulent letters of acceptance from colleges and universities in Canada. And they were, in fact, not issued by those schools at all. They were issued by fake consultants who showed the student, hey, look, I have a letter from the college. You got accepted. How exciting. Give me $5,000. We'll start your study permit application and you can go to Canada. The students ended up getting into Canada, but just before they started school, the agent would call and say, I heard from your college. I'm so sorry. They don't have any seats left. Let me get you into a different college. And they would switch to a really shady private college operating above a massage parlor, giving fraudulent commerce degrees that have zero value. And these poor students travel from overseas only to be in a room with people from their same country, not being educated by anybody who has a deep understanding of Canadian culture, and they feel like they've been duped, and they were duped.
So just to walk people through that, because that was actually cool. That was super important because a lot of people come to study. Like I've made so many friends who are in Canada studying in college. So just to walk them through those steps. So step number one, a scammer will tell you you've been accepted to a college, or a consultant who you've hired, a fake consultant. You show up, so you pay for the airfare, you pay for your room and board, everything. You show up, and then a day or two before you're supposed to start your new dream life, you get a call that says, oh, sorry, they're all out of spots. We've got to ship you off to another place. And of course, they're going to tell you it's the same quality, it's the same blah, 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 same teachers. And you show up, and like you said, there were 900 of these students. So it's not just like you're there for, a Toronto experience, multicultural, different languages, different, things to learn. But you're there with people from, maybe different parts of your country, but probably even the same city as you're coming from. Terrible.
The better schools in Canada, the public colleges and public universities that are not for profit and are funded partly by the government, try to take a limited number of international students so that the international students actually get a cross-cultural experience. The sham colleges, often the private colleges, will bring everybody from one country. It will have been set up in their country. Their agents are in their country. The school is run by people from their country. They sell seats to people from their country, and everybody comes for a Canadian experience and sits in a room with people from their country. Completely fraudulent.
And they're paying top dollar.
And they're paying top dollar for this, exactly. So I think if I had tips for your listeners, first I would say make sure you are dealing with a public college or a public university as opposed to a private one. A lot of people ask me, what's the difference between college and university? Because in the United States, they often say college when they mean university. So the simple answer is college teaches you how to do something, usually something with your hands. You're building, you're plumbing, it's a contractor, you're learning how to do accounting, you are doing the actual work. University teaches you the why. Why are you doing these things? What are the laws associated with this particular area of work? And do we have to follow certain regulations? A lot of colleges and universities now have merged in Canada. So you get a year or two at a college and then a year or two at a university. So you're getting both the how and the why, which is fantastic. I think this started with nursing a number of years ago, and it has expanded since. So I think it's a great pattern to follow. The other thing is, don't be shy to contact the school that you have been accepted by personally. Call them and say, hi, I've received a letter of acceptance, or I've been told that I've been accepted to your school. I was wondering if I could just confirm that with you. The admissions department will have your name if you've been accepted as a student. Now, the Canadian government.
Yeah, no, just to point out, yeah, that's huge right there. Like, of course, they call the school. Don't just rely on the word of this person that's connected you. Call them. It's a public number. You can find a website for them. Very good advice.
And we're going to come back to that actually when we talk about jobs, because that's another big area of fraud. The Canadian government has recently made some rather dramatic changes to the study permit regime in Canada. This news came out less than a month ago. January 22nd, it was indicated that all study permits will be put on hold until each province can create what's called a letter of attestation. They have to prove that the letter of acceptance from the college or the university is authentic for that student. And that should cut down on overseas agents providing fake letters of authorization or fake letters of acceptance. The other change is, unless you are studying at the master's or the PhD level, your spouse is no longer eligible for an open work permit. So they want to prevent people from coming up, enrolling in a sham fake college just so that they can work 20 hours a week and their spouse can work full time and, in fact, not attend the college at all. Postgraduate work permits are something that are promised by overseas agents, and they say when you graduate your school, you will get a post-graduation work permit and you can work in Canada using the skills that you learned in college. That has also been changed, where private and public schools have created alliances so that a student can go to a private campus but receive a diploma or a degree from a public institution. Those schools will no longer be allowed to issue postgraduate work permit applications or offers. The school is not the person to give you the postgraduate work permit. You still have to apply for it. And that's another lie that is told. When you graduate, you will get a postgraduate work. No, when you graduate, you can apply for a postgraduate work permit. And if you meet the requirements, the government may choose to give you one. Of course, if you do meet all of the requirements, obviously they will, but they're going to check to make sure that you were in school. They're going to check to make sure that you did not work more than the required amount of hours. It's usually 20 hours per week. There is a discussion now about increasing that, but it definitely will not be full-time because that would undermine the education of the international student. You can't go to school full-time and work full-time concurrently or at the same time. Something that is...
I was doing that actually before. It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. I mean, you could be
school, 40 hours working. Oh my God. It's not fun.
It's not fun. And you had the ability to do this because you're Canadian. International students are not given that privilege. And if it is found out through their pay slips and tax documents that they were working more than 20 hours a week, then they have violated the conditions of their study permit. The study permit gets taken away and they are told to leave Canada. Misrepresentation is a big word. Misrepresentation is just a fancy word for saying you lied. So if you choose to lie, or if an agent lies for you, you are still responsible. So if you don't even know that the agent lied, you are still responsible. So you must check your application in full before it goes into the government, and you must ask the agent or the consultant for a copy of your application after it goes into the government, so that if that person disappears, you at least know what they've done. If it is found that you have misrepresented yourself, and in your case, this is important for your students, because we often see ads, I'm sure you have seen them online as well, for you don't have to take an English test, we'll just give you the results. We know people on the inside. Pay us and we'll send you your test results. You just tell us the numbers that you need, and we will create the certificate that you've taken the test, and you could submit that to the government. People think, wow, this is great. I don't really want to take the test. I need a certain number to get into the country or into the college. Therefore, I'll pay this company and I'll get a very authentic looking certificate and I'll send that to the Canadian government. What they don't realize is the Canadian government is already linked to the companies that are allowed to offer English tests. And all they have to do is input your name or student number, and they will find out this is a completely fraudulent piece of paper. Now you're banned from Canada for 5 years. Not only can you not come for 5 years, you can't apply for 5 years. It's a 5-year ban for lying to the government. So be super, super careful and make sure that you are doing everything as clearly and as openly and as transparently as possible. It is okay to check the credentials of your lawyer or of your consultant. And we will get to that toward the end of the podcast. So if you listen through, we'll have that information for you. One of the most egregious, one of the most serious cases was a fellow named Sonny Wang. He was in Vancouver, and he faked residency obligations for people who were applying for permanent residency. So if you want to be a permanent resident and you are granted permanent residency, in order to keep the permanent residency, you must be a resident in Canada for 2 years out of every 5. What he did was create fake addresses or put 100 people in his one home address and tell the government that they were living there. And of course, the government, once they started seeing the same address come up over and over and over again, they thought, this is unusual. How can 100 people live in the same house? It ended up being 1,677 people that were defrauded by this guy. 221 were stripped of their citizenship, and 609 were deported. These are people who bought a house, maybe started a life, had a family, they were getting established. 5, 6, 7 years later, we come to find out that this was done in a fraudulent way, and all of that work and time and effort gets stripped away, and you're deported from the country.
And sorry, can you tell me what was the number that got scammed compared to the number that got deported?
The number that is being investigated, 1,677. And when I last checked the news reports, 609 had been deported and 221 citizenships were at risk of being stripped.
Citizenship.
Citizenship. So these people had gone beyond. They had gone beyond permanent residency. They had actually obtained citizenship. And just because you get citizenship doesn't mean that it can't be taken away by the government.
Oh my God! Yeah.
So this fellow owes $900,000 to the Canadian government. That's a little over $600,000 US. He transferred his house and assets to his wife so that the government could not get that money. He spent 2.5 years in jail. And the private citizens can't really sue him for anything because if he owes the government $900,000, what makes them think that they're going to get anything? Very, very unfortunate case. So that was definitely one of the biggest cases. Now, if we go from the West Coast in Vancouver to the East Coast in Halifax, there was a fellow who was not authorized to provide consultation. He was charging between $3,000 and $14,000 to do applications, various applications for people. After about 6 months, people started questioning why they hadn't received any information from the government about how their application was coming along. It turns out that nothing had been filed, all the money was gone, and he ended up spending 20 months in jail as well. In Saskatchewan, there was a case of false job offers. And in Vancouver, there were 1,200 fake passports that were printed. And in Toronto, $2.3 million was taken from Filipinos for temporary foreign worker applications. So this is happening all across the country. And these are the ones that we know in Canada because we can persecute them in Canada. The ones that are overseas, we don't. Yes, exactly. Right.
Like, so how many millions of people are getting scammed in Canada and outside of Canada right now?
Exactly. Right. So Mexico City is a huge city, and there will be cases in Mexico City where there are fraudulent actors and Mexicans will go in to apply for Canada. They know that there's a free trade agreement between Canada and the United States, and the agents will play on that knowledge to convince them that they can get them into Canada easily. The individual will pay the money, and the person is not authorized to do so. The government will not accept or review applications that are submitted by an unauthorized representative. So the law in Canada is you must be licensed in Canada in order to charge money for immigration advice.
Okay.
And go ahead.
Like you said as well, it's tough to tell if someone's actually licensed because they can, identity theft is a real thing, and people can steal your identity, your license, your tax number. So, like, are there any things, anyone that they can call, anyone that people can do in order to like check with, that everything lines up?
Absolutely. I will let your audience know shortly who they can contact and the websites that they can go to check a public registry. And the public registry has a listing of all the authorized people. So if your person is not on the public registry, they are not authorized to provide these services for any money. You raised a really good point about identity theft. You would not believe the number of people who, without me asking, send me their passports and their birth certificates as photos in WhatsApp or email. Mr. Chalmers, I'm interested in coming to Canada. I want to give you some information about myself so that you can look at my application or see whether or not I'm a good candidate. And then they just go ahead and start sending all these personal documents. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? You don't even know who I am. I could take this passport and birth certificate information and create all sorts of false documents or apply for loans or a mortgage, all in that person's name, not in my name. So identity theft is huge. We have to remind people that these are criminal organizations and they will use that information however they can. So sending things like personal documents through email has to be done with a great degree of caution, because you need to know who you're sending them to, and that person is going to safeguard your information so that it's not used inappropriately. The other issue. Go ahead. Yeah.
That again, yeah, big time. Everybody listening, because I know like WhatsApp is so easy for sending documents.
So easy.
Don't take pictures of your passport and send it to anybody, or your credit card, of course, or anything more than a selfie. Really,
exactly. Yeah. So driver's licenses is another example. People want to come and they want to drive trucks in Canada. So they say, here's my license. Am I authorized to drive a truck in Canada? Well, first of all, the answer is no, because you need Canadian training to drive a truck in Canada. And now I have your driver's license number, your address, your age, your height, your eye color, what you look like, and I can do all sorts of things with that document. So it doesn't take much to create false identity. And as we said earlier, people are printing fake passports and fake driver's licenses and fake letters of acceptance. Fake documents are available. I see the ads for them on Facebook all the time. Buy the document that you need. You don't actually have to apply for it legitimately. This is fine for a party favor if you want to play a trick on a friend, but as soon as you submit that document to any government anywhere in the world, there are huge negative implications for you. So definitely great advice for your audience. Be very protective of your personal information. A lot of people are not aware about the job situation in Canada. And we hear that there are a lot of jobs available, and that is true. We also hear a lot of people are looking for jobs, and that is true. But these two aren't often connected to each other. The job seeker and the employee seeker aren't often connected, simply because the candidate for the job simply doesn't have the skills that the employer is looking for. We have a lot of very, very educated, well-trained people in Canada. So if you want to come to Canada and work, you really do have to have a skill that is either unique or that you're a specialist in. It could also be a skill that we need in high demand. The high demand jobs right now, the areas of expertise where you have a much easier chance of getting a job and being accepted for permanent residency are as follows: Healthcare, number one. We need nurses, we need doctors, we need physiotherapists, kinesiologists, radiology technicians, respiratory therapists, personal support workers, home care workers, all of the medical assistants. Because we have an aging population, we need more of these people. And because we have had a lot of immigration in the last few years. So our immigration numbers have outstripped or have been more aggressive than the number of people we can graduate in this field. So we are taking a lot of medical professionals from Mexico and from the Philippines because we know the training, we trust the training has already been vetted by the Canadian officials, and these are the people most likely to be accepted into Canada for healthcare. The other field is construction. We have a housing crisis in Canada. We have far too many people for the residences that are available. Part of this has to do with the number of international students that we see. Our international student number has gone up 3 times in the last few years. I think we're seeing now 800,000 or 900,000 international students applying for immigration as a student for a study permit. Those numbers are going to come down now because as a result of these new measures and the announcement that was made on January the 22nd, Canada will see an overall decrease of 35% of the study applications or study permit approvals. In provinces like Ontario and British Columbia, that will be a 50% reduction. This is to allow the industry to straighten out a little bit. A lot of the private colleges will be stripped of their licenses, and the public colleges will be asked to spend more time and care making sure that the students that they accept have a place to live. You can't just accept a student without having a residence for them. Some schools have a residence on campus. Some have homestay departments that will link you with people in the community, and some will invite you and say, good luck. And those are the people who are really in trouble because they end up sharing a bedroom with 2, 3, 4 other people, and they're spending $500, $600, $700 a month for this shared room. So the housing crisis is an issue that will get a little bit better with the reduction in international students, and it will get a little bit better with the targeted immigration that I'm talking about now, not accepting everybody, but accepting people in the healthcare field and in the construction field. So if you can build a house, if you understand roofing, if you know how to pour concrete, if you understand drywall, if you can paint, if you can pour a foundation, if you can do when I say landscaping, not necessarily landscaping for art, but bulldozers and graders to create a level area for a subdivision, for example, building curbs, digging for drainage. These are all high demand jobs. Civil engineers, high demand job right now in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Civil engineers, a lot of them in Mexico.
A lot of civil engineers.
In Monterey, lots of those folks. Oh, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Farmers. We need people to grow food, whether it's animals or vegetables or fruit. We've got beautiful fruit areas in Ontario and in British Columbia. The middle of the country in Alberta is known for amazing beef, cattle farms. Saskatchewan is known for wheat. They grow wheat and ship that worldwide for all sorts of things, bread and pasta and so on. So farming is another area that is in high demand. And transportation. We need people to move products across the border from the United States or Mexico into Canada and drive back and forth across Canada to ship these goods to people. It's usually the last few kilometers where a truck will be required. A product might come in by airplane or a product might come in by boat. But then where does it go? Onto a truck. And that truck is responsible for getting it across the country. So truck driving is a high demand occupation. But when I say transportation, not only trucking, I had a client recently who installs pre-assembled parts into airplanes. And that's considered transportation, right? He's in the people moving business. So whether it's airplane, truck, train, boat, if it's moving people and it's considered transportation, it's in this high demand category. The other interesting category, the fifth and final category, is people who speak French. And it's not necessarily a business skill, because the job that you are being offered doesn't even require you to speak French. But the immigration program requires you to speak French because the Canadian government has a plan to spread French out across the country. And as some people know, and as you are well aware, Quebec is our French province. New Brunswick is our only official bilingual province. And really, it's just English speakers in the rest of Canada. So there is a fantastic international mobility program right now for francophones, for people who speak French. So it's another opportunity for people to find a job and apply to live in Canada, so long as it's outside of Quebec, because we already know there's lots of French people in Quebec. In terms of English, you may be preparing people for the CELPIP test, which is the Canadian version of IELTS. It's a Canadian designed English test. IELTS, IELTS, is the big UK version. It's also known worldwide. And there's a new one by a company called Pearson. Pearson English Test, PET, is AI marked or AI scored, which is rather interesting. It is computer-based and AI scored. IELTS, I'm not sure I would encourage people outside of the Commonwealth countries to do, simply because they use British, Australian, and New Zealand accents and British, Australian, and New Zealand vocabulary. And that vocabulary is a little bit different than what is used in the United States and Canada. So we might say the hood of the car, they would say the bonnet. We might say the trunk of the car, they say the boot. We say the dog is on the sidewalk, they would say the dog is on the pavement. So there are a few differences that might throw people off and cause them to misunderstand a question. In the IELTS speaking test, you're also speaking to a human. Whereas in the CELPIP speaking test, it's all done by computer, and the speaking test is done at the same time. You don't have to rebook a different appointment to go back for the speaking test. So I suspect.
And sorry, you said the Pearson one is the one that's marked by AI. CELPIP
is a human. It's done on computer, but marked by a human. Yeah. So the multiple choice part for reading and listening is computer, and the writing and speaking parts are always marked by a human. Another area of concern for fraud is marriage fraud. And we see people engaging in marriage fraud. They will get into a relationship with somebody purely for the purposes of accessing Canada as a permanent resident. The government will assess your relationship for genuineness. So if you just met this person, the probability of you being able to prove genuineness is quite low. If, however, you have known this person for a number of years, you've got pictures together, your families know each other, your families have met each other, you've exchanged gifts, you have email messages and text messages going back and forth, you have added this person to your employment health benefits, for example, in Canada. If you're on the same, if you're on the same lease, if you share a cell phone bill, these are all the things you're going to look for. If you don't even have the same residential address, let alone car insurance and cell phone bill, they're not going to believe that you are living together. There are cases where people can't live together, and the government understands that. Perhaps it's a same-sex couple living in a country where that sort of behavior would result in physical punishment. The government obviously is not going to say, don't risk your personal safety. We understand that you have to live apart, but we do want to see how you rely on each other, both emotionally and financially, as a married couple would do. And something else to know, and people have made errors in, is that under Canadian law, if you have been living with your partner for more than 1 year, you're considered in a common law marriage. It is a common law relationship. So some people will say, no, I'm not married. But meanwhile, they've been living together for 5 years and they have a child together. In the eyes of the Canadian government, you're married. Some people will say, I was married before, but we've been separated for 5 years. And now I have been with my new partner for 3 years. How do I prove that I'm no longer married? Technically, I'm still married. In the eyes of the Canadian government, no, you're not. We look at your current relationship. How long have you been in your current relationship? That's what matters. So what's on paper is less important than what's happening in reality. So they will very much examine you for reality. And if you want to convince the government that you are a legitimate couple, you might want to include text messages where you're fighting with each other. Because people often will send, oh, I love you. Oh, I love you too. Oh, I can't wait until you get here. Oh, smoochy, smoochy, kissy icons and emoticons that are all with hearts and stuff. That's not a real relationship. Couples argue. Why did you tell your family that I was this? And how come your sister? And why? And you didn't make the cell phone bill payment the way you should. My phone got cut off. And it's these little arguments that are part of real life. And if you can indicate to the immigration officer that that is part of your discourse on occasion, it adds legitimacy to the relationship.
Right?
Of course.
Yeah. People butt heads. Show it to them. That's going to help your case. Interesting. Very interesting.
You've been in a relationship for 5 years and you've never had a fight? I mean, are you joking? Come on. This isn't a real relationship. You're trying to make it look good, but it doesn't look legitimate. It might look good, but it doesn't look legitimate. You know, we talk about a joke where a husband and wife are in an interview with an immigration officer, and the immigration officer asks the husband, "What's your wife's favorite color?" And the husband says, "Purple." And the wife starts hitting the husband. "You idiot, you know it's not purple. You know I like red. How could you be so stupid?" Immigration officer says, "Yeah, you're married."
Right? There you have it.
So it's about legitimacy. Yeah. Absolutely. In terms of work in Canada, and we had talked about those high demand occupations, it's important for people to know that it is illegal to sell a job in Canada. So an employer or an unauthorized and sometimes a legitimate authorized representative will say, I can get you a job with this company, but it's going to cost you $40,000. And then we'll apply for your work permit. It is absolutely illegal. You should never pay for a job in Canada. Nobody should charge you for any services other than applying for the work permit or doing legal work on your behalf so that you can come legitimately. But in terms of just paying to have access to the company as an employee, absolutely illegal. In Ontario, as of January 1st of this year, and it's been happening in Saskatchewan for a while and also in British Columbia, recruiters need to be licensed with the province in order to recruit international employees. So the government is really trying to curb or stop this activity of selling jobs, but it does still happen. They are aware. If, of course, the foreign national goes to the government and complains, that employer is in huge trouble, facing fines and probably being blacklisted such that they will never be able to hire another foreign national. Unfortunately, the foreign national employee often does not report their employer because they are afraid that it will affect them as well.
Of course. Yep.
So we encourage people to disclose when an employer has been fraudulent with you because we don't want that kind of activity happening. And something else that is important in terms of protecting foreign workers, international foreign workers, is if your boss or employer is being threatening to you, that is threat of violence, threat of anything of a sexual nature, threat of reprisal, That is, they're going to punish you for something that you've done. Financial threats, we're not going to pay you if you don't do these things. All of those reasons could allow you to apply for an open work permit as opposed to a closed work permit with that employer. The concern that the government,
Wow.
huge, right? So the
So
concern that
there's a path. Like they can report the employer, and then they're actually not going to be tied to that employer. If an employer threatens you, they're cutting themselves off. Like they're shooting themselves in the foot, because you report them, and then you're eligible for this an open work permit. That's a step up.
exactly. It is a step up, because the
They're
concern
helping you.
is
Yeah.
if the employer feels that you are tied only to them, they might treat you however they want, because they think you can't leave. You're stuck with me. My name, my company name is on your work permit. You're not allowed to go anywhere else. So I will abuse you and you'll have to take it. And the government says, absolutely not. That will not be tolerated. Come and let us know. We will separate you from that employer. We will deal with the employer on our own time when we can penalize them as appropriate. And we will allow you to apply for an open work permit, and you can go and work for anybody that you want.
Very good news. Like this isn't all doom and gloom.
Absolutely not. The government is very aware.
forward.
Yeah, the government is very aware of these things, and they are really taking measures to protect international workers wherever possible. If somebody is working on a farm, for example, their accommodations have to be appropriate. They cannot be sleeping in a shed outside that is exposed to elements or rodents, for example. All the employment standards rules apply just as they would to a Canadian. So if there is a law in Ontario that says an employer may not do X, that applies to everybody, not just people that are in Canada. And a lot of international workers are told, you don't have protection under the law because you're not Canadian. And in Canada, as soon as your foot steps on Canadian soil, you are given all of the rights and privileges of a Canadian. So don't be afraid. I don't want any of your listeners to be afraid to come forward and report any sort of unusual, suspicious, fraudulent activity, because the government is very much on your side. We don't want an international reputation of being poor protectors of guests to our country.
It's really good news, because like in a lot of countries, it's quite the opposite. Like in Mexico, in Canada, we say, you're innocent until proven guilty. In Mexico, the law is you're guilty until proven innocent.
Is that right?
It is flipped around.
Wow.
If you're walking down the street, the cops can just pick you up until you prove your innocence, which can be impossible. So
that's incredible.
Yeah, it's absolutely so. But the thing is, exactly, people get so used to, they grow up, this is what they know, that the government is not on your side. The government is, oftentimes in their own countries, the government may be the fraudulent actor.
Wow.
Quite often. Or, stealing tax dollars, doing all kinds of things in corruption. And then, you get to Canada, and there's so much that you can't believe. You can't believe that there's a government that's actually trying to help you. That there's a government that's actually going to protect you, even if you're not a citizen, even if even if you don't speak the language perfectly.
Absolutely.
Even if you don't speak the language at all.
Interpreters are always available for any sort of legal matters. If you have to speak to the police, or there's a situation, a serious situation where you need to understand what's happening, interpreters will be provided in every language. So, do we have a perfect government? No, absolutely not. I don't know of a government in the world that's perfect. There is misspending. Tax dollars are taken, and people get frustrated because they don't get what they expected. But on a whole, it is a fairly transparent system. A lot of immigration information is available online. And let me give you the address now. It's quite easy. For the Canadian government immigration, www.cic.gc.ca. CIC is Citizenship and Immigration Canada. .gc is Government of Canada. And .ca is our top-level domain for the country. If you receive a .gc.ca email, you know it's from the government.
Mm-hmm.
The information for immigration is available on the website, although it is a little bit thin. It talks about the rules and it talks about how you can apply, and it says that you don't necessarily need a representative, which is absolutely true. There is no legal obligation for you to hire anybody to assist you with your application. But it is a legal matter. And just as most people would not represent themselves in court, you really shouldn't represent yourself in an immigration matter either, because there are a lot of rules, regulations, ministerial instructions, so instructions from the Minister of Immigration, and public policies that are changed on a regular basis. Also, if a judge is making a ruling in a case, that ruling now becomes law because in Canada, we follow precedent. It is a common law situation or a common law system, unlike France, for example, that uses a civil law system where every case is adjudicated individually. In a common law situation, they will say, if your case is just like a case that we saw last year, then the ruling will be the same. Unless there is some different sort of evidence or different sort of circumstances, your lawyer can argue that this is the same as it was before. A judge has already ruled on that, and therefore this should be the result of this current case. So there's a lot more than just what's on the website, but the website is certainly a good area to start. In terms of finding whether or not your consultant or lawyer or agent is authorized, I would recommend going to Google and typing "find an authorized representative in Canada" or "find an authorized immigration professional in Canada." And you will be directed to one of two websites. One is a Government of Canada website that will give you links to all of the provincial law societies. So the Law Society of Ontario will have a listing of all the lawyers that are able to provide services on your behalf. If a lawyer is not on the list, they are not authorized to help you in that province.
And just to interject for a moment, I just Googled that quickly while you said it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the first thing that pops up, find out if your representative is authorized. So that's it. You can check if your person is licensed to represent you.
And is that a government website, or did it come up with what's called the CICC, the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants?
This is a government website, or at least what I recognize as one, Canada.ca.
Excellent. Very good. So on that website, you will also have a link to the CICC, which I mentioned. This is a federal college. It is the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants, and it is a public registry where you would type the first or last name of your consultant or agent or company name of that person, and it will tell you whether or not that person is currently a member and whether or not they are active, or if their license has been revoked, or if there is some sort of suspension. You can click on that person's name and it will give you their telephone number and their email address so that you can contact them directly. Make sure that you are dealing with the immigration consultant that is on that list. If you hire a company, the company does not do the application for you. A person does the application for you, and that person is responsible, not the company. So make sure that you know the actual person who is signing the documents on your behalf. And those are really the best ways to protect yourself against fraud. Knowing that it exists is number one. It exists, it's rampant, it's international. Number two is know that you can check your representative for authenticity or legitimacy. And number three is know that once you're in Canada, provided you haven't lied to the government is on your side to help you with any issues that you have with a fraudulent actor.
Hey, accent learner, thanks for listening all the way through. I have a handful of coaching spots opening in April, and I'm looking for some serious accent learners who want to see hard-hitting results before the summer of 2024. Does that sound like you? Well, then apply for your first coaching strategy session with me. I've helped hundreds of people develop the American accent, and I can help you too. I'll review your application, and if I see that my coaching methods are a good fit for your needs, we'll get in touch to set up your accent training strategy for success. So what are you waiting for? April's almost here. Apply now and book your accent training strategy call while spots are available.